What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Board Game Sensei YouTube channel. I'm your boy Nick, and guys, today I have a video for you and a question, really. And it's a question that I've been thinking about here recently about the board gaming hobby. And let me ask you this question. When was the last time that you opened a new board game, and when you opened the new board game, you flipped through the rule book and thought, why does this feel like studying for an exam? Why does this feel like I'm studying something rather than enjoying it and reading through it and having a good time as you read the rule book? Look, I love heavy games, right? I love depth and I love tough decisions. But lately, you know, when you look at these rule books, you look at the games you get maybe in the mail and you open up and it's 30, 40 page rule book. Or for one of my favorite games, you have Elder Scrolls Betrayal: The Second Era, and it's 100 pages long or 95 pages long. You have to ask yourself, is the board game hobby getting too complicated? Now, I don't mean deeper. I don't mean smarter. I just mean more complicated. And I don't think that that's the same thing. So what I want to do in this video is hopefully fairly, is break this down and see if why maybe the board gaming hobby is getting too complicated, because complexity isn't always bad. Complexity isn't bad at all. But I do think that the hobby is, or something in the hobby at least, is shifting. I do think that. So let me go to my notes here. So for the first point I want to talk about here is, like I talked about a little bit ago, and that is rule overload. And modern games, when we look at the rule books and stuff, what do they often assume? They often assume that we already speak board game, right? Those who come in, they already speak board game. They think you know all the keywords. They think you know icon soup. They think you know the edge case clarification. They think you know the phase breakdowns inside of the phase breakdowns. I mean, compare something like Ticket to Ride, right? You have Ticket to Ride. You can teach the game in 5 minutes. All you do is draw cards, you claim routes, and you score points, right? Ticket to Ride is probably a really good gateway game there. But then you compare that to something like Arc Nova, right? I mean, phenomenal game, right? It's one of my favorite games of all time, but it's deep, right? It's strategic, but you're explaining card play restrictions, you're explaining action tracks, you're explaining break timing, you're explaining conservation scoring, you're explaining sponsor synergies. And that's not a knock on the game, because like I said, I absolutely love Arc Nova, but it is a question. And what is that question? Have we normalized rule density to the point where new players coming in, right, feel locked out? And if every game requires a 40-minute teach, an hour teach, well, that really will change on who shows up to game night or who shows up to whatever it may be. So we see the rule book overload that can be really complicated. And is it getting too complicated, right? And then let's go to the second point I have here. But when we think about complexity, we think about maybe complexity versus depth, right? Complexity. Now, what are the key distinctions to complexity versus depth? Well, complexity is how many rules you have, right? Depth is how meaningful your decisions are during the game, right? Look, a game can be simple and a game can be simple and deep as well, right? So, I mean, look at something like Azul, right? Azul, the rules are what? They're simple, right? The rules are easy to teach, they're easy to get to the table. But if you think about Azul, the tension just builds up as you're playing the game. And Azul is a great example, I think, of simple in a deep game. Now we compare that to something like Gloomhaven, or we compare that to something like Tainted Grail, and what happens? Amazing games, right? Although there is a debate whether Gloomhaven is still amazing, because I mean, there's a lot of games that have pretty much beaten that now, but that's besides the point, right? I think Tainted Grail is a great game, although I haven't gotten it to the table like I want to get it to the table. But you look at something like that and you think amazing game, you think huge system, you think tons of rules, but here's the difference. Its complexity serves tactical hand management, scenario progression, character growth, character progression, and the complication creates the depth, right? So the problem is when games add, extra resources, resource types rather, when games add extra sub phases inside of sub phases, and when games add extra tracking, where you're having to keep up with all that's going on, and really it doesn't create better decisions. At least in my opinion, it creates more complexity, more complex games. It just creates friction. That's what it creates. More, let's be honest, more isn't actually better or automatically better, I should say. It's not. And so we have that problem, which could make the game super complex and makes the hobby. Sometimes it can, the balance is weird to find, right? It's so hard to find that balance between complexity and depth and try to get them to where they even out just enough to where the game's not too complex and to where the game is not too simple, or it is not too simple as well. So there is a balance there. I want you guys to get that there as well. I'm not saying that there's nothing, I'm just trying to say that. So what's another point about, is the board gaming hobby getting too complex? And another thing is expansion and content bloat, right? There's so much expansion and content bloat. Now, really, here's the thing. You buy the base game, and then apparently expansion 1 fixes balance. And then you buy expansion 2, and what does expansion 2 do? It adds essential content. Then you buy expansion 3, and what is it supposed to do? It's supposed to complete the whole experience of the game. Suddenly, your 90-minute game or your 60-minute game turns into a whole 3-hour beast of a game to even just set up, right? So, you look at something, I think of even just a simple game, right? Let me think. I think of something like, let's say Lost Ruins of Arnak, right? It's a simple game already, right? There's just enough complexity, there's just enough depth where it makes it really good, right? I think the problem comes, now, I love Lost Ruins of Arnak. I have nothing bad to say about Lost Ruins of Arnak, right? But I think the problem comes, and I'm just trying to use it as an example, right? I think the problem comes when we have the base game. By the way, already a good base game, already good. The complexity level is just enough. But then you add an expansion. Now, I'm not harking on Lost Ruins of Arnak because they don't necessarily do this, right? But you add an expansion, and like I said, apparently it's supposed to fix the balance of the game, right? Let's say Lost Ruins of Arnak was super unbalanced, and now you add this expansion. I'm sorry, my wash machine just went off. But you have this expansion that fixes the balance. And then they add an expansion that adds essential content. So I do think of things like the Leaders expansion. By the way, I think it's an essential content piece for the game. But why not add that into the game already, right? And then you think of expansion 3 maybe that comes out, and it completes the whole entire experience, right? At what point does optional become expected, right? At what point does optional become expected? And how many players bounce off because they feel behind, or if they bounce off, they say, man, scratch the board gaming hobby, because they feel behind because they don't own everything. They don't own everything that they feel like they should own, right? So that kind of escalation increases complexity, not just in rules, but it completely increases the complexity in just commitment in general, right? So that's something there. And then point 4, I have one more point after this, but point 4, this is a big one. This is a really big one. At least I think it is, and it's accessibility and new players, right? How accessible is it, and is it accessible enough for new players to come in, right? So a healthy hobby, any hobby, no matter what hobby you talk about, right? A healthy hobby needs new people, Be honest. A healthy hobby needs new people. If your friends tell you or your family tells you, I've never played modern board games before, are we going to pull out a game like Brass Birmingham? Are we going to pull out a game like Ark Nova? Well, I hope not. Now, don't get me wrong. Those have their place, right? If you think that your friend can handle a heavier game like that, if you think your family can handle a heavier game like that, then by all means, introduce them to that first. Because honestly, but I mean, in the scope of things, we're not going to bring out a Brass Birmingham. We're not going to bring out an Ark Nova. We're not even going to bring out a more complex co-op game like Grim Coven or like even Townsfolk Tussle, because complexity, let's be honest, can intimidate before fun even begins. I think of a game that when I first got into the hobby, when I was first getting into the hobby a couple years ago, I remember a game that I had called Endless Winter. And it was not too complex, but what made it complex for my play group and what made it complex for me is trying to teach all these different mechanics, trying to teach all these different things and all these different iconographies. And it scared away my play group from even wanting to touch the game, even wanting to learn the game. And I sat there for maybe an hour just trying to explain everything, and we only got through one round, and we put up the game. We had to put it up because it was just too much too soon, right? It was just too much too soon. Look, if the industry, if the board game industry skews on heavier games and more denser games by default, what's going to happen is we're going to risk creating a hobby that's going to reward the hobbyists, that's going to reward veterans, and it's just going to discourage newcomers. At least that's what I think. That's my opinion on the matter, and that really it shrinks our table. It brings our table and it condenses it to something that we don't want it to condense to, right? So look, but I'm gonna be fair here. I want to make this fair because complexity. This is my final point. Complexity is not bad. Not all complexity is bad, right? So we have to be fair. I want to be fair with this because it's not all bad, right? I mean, some games should be complex. I think of games like a boss battler. I mean, Grim Coven. I think it should be complex. Make sure this is still on. Yep, it's still on. Okay, I was just making sure because it will cut off on you in a jiffy, right? But I mean, you have a boss battles. You have maybe deep economic simulation games, right? They should be complex. Maybe even a legacy campaign, right? Or even campaigns in general, right? They should be complex. I do think that. But the question is, the question isn't, is this complicated? The question is this complexity earning its place in the hobby? That's what it comes down to. Does it create tension? Does it support the theme? Does it create meaningful decisions? Does it enhance the immersion of the game? Or is it because complexity sells to hobbyists? There's a difference between feeling challenged and feeling buried in the hobby, feeling buried in all the complexity that's going on, and that really matters. Now, look, I don't think that the hobby's doomed. That's not why I created this video. I don't think the hobby's doomed. I don't think heavy games are the problem. We just need balance. That's what I think. Here recently, I don't know. There's not been there's obviously some games, right? Not every game is going to be a heavy game or something like that. But here recently, at least the games that I've looked at and that I've seen have seems to be more complex than it should be. Then it maybe even leads on to be, right? I just think we need balance. We need elegant games. We need more approachable games, which we have. We need deep games. We need challenging games. Complexity should serve fun, but it shouldn't replace fun. It shouldn't replace it. So I'll leave you with this, okay? I'll leave you with this. This is what I'm gonna leave you with. When we sit down to play, ask yourself these questions, and these are good questions to ask, right? I got to ask myself these questions, right? Do we feel excited when we sit down to play, or do we feel exhausted? Look, I don't want to come home from work. I don't want to pull out a game and be exhausted from pulling out a game. When games should calm us, games should be something that we do with our family, that we do with our friends, that allow us to have fun, to not even think about work, and not think about having to do work after work. That's what games should do. So let me know in the comments, guys, is the hobby getting too complicated, or are we just getting better at handling it? So, guys, thank you guys for watching. This was really it was a thought that I thought about over the course of time. Didn't know if I wanted to make the video because, you know, is the gaming hobby really getting complicated, or is it just me blowing smoke, you know? But guys, thank you guys for watching. If you like what you see, you know, you can do all that stuff you want to do. I don't know. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, whatever you guys want to do. But again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.